Good evening, good afternoon, or good morning, wherever you are in the world. I'm Regina Yao, and I'm moderating the 10th YouTube session of the 9th fall edition of our Read for Pixels campaign. So through Read for Pixels, the Pixel Project is collaborating with 11 award-winning best-selling authors to raise awareness about violence against women and to raise funds for the Pixel Project to keep our efforts to end violence against women alive and kicking. We'll be telling you more about the Read for Pixels fundraiser, which has lots and lots of exclusive author goodies a little later in this session. And you can find out more about the Pixel Project and violence against women by visiting www.thepixelproject.net. Now, we have a very special guest for today's live Read for Pixels discussion and Q&A session. And here he is, the multi-award-winning horror author, Tim Lebbon. Now, Tim is a New York Times bestselling writer from South Wales, and he's had over 40 novels published to date, as well as hundreds of novellas and short stories. His latest novels are the eco-horror Eden and The Last Storm. And he has won several awards, and his work has been adapted for the big screen, including The Silence, which is on Netflix. You can watch it on Netflix. And Tim has also very generously donated some fabulous goodies to the stash of author treats that we have up as perks for donors at the Read for Pixels Rally Up fundraising page. Both are available to donors worldwide. Now, the first one I'm going to talk about has actually already been snapped up. So it's Tim's Big Scares book bundle. So this bundle includes one copy of The Last Storm. It's the first edition trade paperback, and one copy of All Nightmare Long, the first edition UK hardcover. Both are signed and personalized by Tim for the donor. And the donor is Dana Cameron in the US. Thank you, Dana, for...
Thank you, Dana.
Yeah, thank you, Dana, for donating to our fundraiser. Now, the second goodie is a really interesting one. It's Tim's Death by Fungi minor character goodie. So this is really unique because we've never ever had an author, offer to kill someone on the page using mushrooms.
I will stress that this is in a novel, not in real life.
Yeah. So you get to name a minor character. The donor will get to name a minor character. The minor character experiences death by fungi. Though just a little note that the name may be adapted by Tim to suit naming conventions in the world of the book. So, Tim's open to it. You can have a discussion, but it will need to suit the world of the book. And Tim will send you a signed and personalized first edition copy of the book when it is released, so you can keep it as a memento. There's only one of this fungi-themed horror treat, and Tim will make sure that, your death is really memorable. Horror fans everywhere will be so horrified. They'll be talking about it.
It will be horrific. It will be fantastic.
Now, we've raised, and we've been chatting about this with Tim, we've only raised $2,030, which is 40% towards our $5,000 fundraising goal so far. And this is really the slowest fundraiser ever. So we do ask that you give generously as you can before the fundraiser ends in October, which is next month. And all funds will go towards keeping our work, including Read for Pixels, to which this event belongs, alive and kicking. And if you're watching this session on YouTube right now, you will also be able to ask Tim questions live. So if you have any burning questions for Tim about his books, about what's coming up for him, you can ask it live. And just make sure you are logged into your YouTube account so that you can type your questions into the chat box to the right of the YouTube screen. And Xiao Chin, who is today's producer and chat box moderator, will relay them to me to read out to Tim to answer. Now, welcome, Tim. What will you be reading for us today?
Thanks, Regina. I'm delighted to be here. Thanks for having me on. It's a real honor. So I'm going to be reading a chapter from my new novel, The Last Storm. which is out now from Titan in the UK and the US. Now, this is the second eco thriller horror novel that I've written. The first one was Eden. They're not really linked. I suppose ostensibly they could be in the same world. They're both set in the world where the climate crisis has tipped over the point of no return that is often talked about. So in The Last Storm, it's set in North America. It's a North America that's suffering from drought and famine. So the entire sort of central swathe of North America, the farming belt as it is now, is in this book known as the desert. So there's lots of nastiness going on. There's lots of hardships. There's increased temperatures, crop failures, but there's also a family in the book who were known as the Rainmakers. And these people have a sort of arcane ability to build an apparatus which is sort of magical, and this apparatus enables them to bring down rain from cloudless skies, as it were. Later in the book, you sort of find out that the rain's coming down from a sort of alternate world, alternate reality place. And the problem with that is this alternate world isn't completely benevolent, and sometimes with rain, the Rainmakers bring down something else, and these other things start as creatures, like in the first chapter, such as snakes and spiders and nasties. And as the book goes on, the stuff that's being brought down by the Rainmakers gets worse and worse. So the core of the novel is a family. It's the father, mother, and daughter. The daughter has previously started to exhibit rainmaking abilities, and because of the horrors the father's been through by bringing down deadly creatures, he tried to stop his daughter from doing it. He thinks his efforts resulted in her death, but they didn't. So the daughter is Ash, and she's out on her own. She's suffering quite a bit from this gift stroke curse. So this first chapter, this few pages I'm going to read, it sort of introduces Ash. It's Ash's first appearance in the book, and it talks about where she is and how she's sort of surviving on her own in a really harsh environment. So this is the first chapter. In the eye, in the silence, I'm almost myself again. I don't know how long I've been lost in the tumult. 3 days, a week? I'm not really sure where I am. A small town somewhere? Sad, tired place with sad, tired people. A few of them glance at me as I walk along the street, probably because I'm a stranger. I hope it's nothing more. One time, on emerging from the tumult, my face, clothes, and knuckles were covered in blood, and one of my teeth was loose. I pause in front of a store window and examine my reflection. I have to shift left and right so that I can see. No blood on my face, at least. My short hair is dirty and heavy with dust. My eyes are deep set and surrounded by wrinkles from the heat, thirst and hunger, but rarely from laughter. My appearance doesn't seem too bad. Wherever I've been, however long has passed, I've been looking after myself. I've even been applying sun cream. Soon I'll start to recall some of the recent past as scenes and voices, feelings and thoughts that might not even feel like my own. I'll grab on to what I can and make as much sense of those moments as possible. There's always a miasma of chaos about the memories that come to me while I'm in the eye. Of course there is. They're tales of my time in the storm. Reflected in the store window, I watch the street. A few people walk here and there, some of them using umbrellas to shield against the merciless sun. One elderly couple hold hands, and when they pass me, I see the woman glance at me, frowning. I wonder what she's thinking. Maybe she feels pity. I'd rather that than her be afraid. Many of the towns and farming communities scattered across the dying plains of the desert are visited by drifters, those looking for work or something to steal, or simply somewhere to live for a while. I've met these wanderers. I'm one of them. None of them hide secrets like mine. Hello, I say, turning to the old couple. They pause. The man smiles. The woman's frown remains. My name's Ash. Morning, Ash, the man says. He's tall and gaunt, with folds of skin around his eyes and heavy jowls that hint at a past as a more portly gentleman. Can we help you? What brings you to Three Rocks, the woman asks. Work or charity? Work, I say. I have no idea how long I'll remain in the eye. The shortest time I can recall is mere days. the longest several months, a more settled period when I've tried to put down roots. But the storms returned, and as they always do, and hauled me down into the tumult once again. I work where I can, and sometimes, even in those dark times I hardly remember, I manage to hold down a job. What are you good at? The man asks. Anything manual. You don't look strong, the woman says. I'm wiry. I try to smile. I can tell by her reaction that it doesn't work. Where are you from? The man asks. He's kind. I can see that in his eyes, hear it in his voice, and I think his wife must be too. I've experienced many moments of kindness on the road, and the opposite as well. I'm not lying about being wiry and strong, and I can look after myself. One time in Farzan Gap, I stabbed a man in the arm and shoulder when he wouldn't take no for an answer. I left that place without waiting to see if he'd bled to death, hiding in the back of a soaker's wagon for 2 days while they drove me into darkness. By the time I was in the eye again, I was afraid to look online for news of the stabbing. I didn't see my face on any news screens. That was good enough for me. Massachusetts originally, I say, but here and there mostly. You got family? The woman asks. No, the lie is quick and easy. Poor kid, the man says. We used to run a farm, me and June. Small, only a couple of 100 acres. Our 2 sons took it over, what, now 20 years back? 23, June says. She smiles at me at last, thinking of her sons. It was bad back then, but nowhere near what it is now, the man says. No work on your farm then, I ask. The boys went west, June says. Can't blame them. Farm's just a ruin now. Fields are desert, the man says. Bruce, friend of ours, runs the store downtown. June nods along the street. Moore's, try there. He might not pay much, but he's decent and lets workers stay in the cabin in his backyard. And his wife's a great cook, the man says. June glares at him, but he doesn't seem to notice. His glare has shifted over my shoulder into the window and a reflection of easier times. I wonder at the story behind his stare, her glare, but it's not my place to ask. I'm tired and in need. I've got $100 in my pocket, a phone with a dead battery, and a backpack full of worldly belongings. Thanks, I'll drop by, I say. Good luck, the man says. June only nods at me as they walk away. In the distance, past the low buildings at the edge of town, the dust devil dances left and right, sucking up dying plants and spitting them out again, as if taking pleasure at mixing up the past. I watch it for a couple of minutes in case it develops something more ferocious, but no one seems concerned. The dust falls and drifts, and the thermal and breeze that form the tornado breathes its last. I turn back to the store window, trying to see the old man's past. Looking deeper through the sheen of sun on the grimy glass, I see an old guitar case propped on a stand. There are many other objects around it. They look like the orphans of homes that have been boarded up and cleared out by people like the old couple's sons, eager to move on, to try to find somewhere better. But it's the guitar case that draws my eye. I catch my breath. An image plays across my mind, sepia and blurred, and I blink rapidly as if to make it move, because I can tell it's a memory of something recent. I'm viewing it through the haze of my recent tumult. The guitar case has inspired it. My blood runs cold. The case reminds me so much of the one I used to keep my apparatus in. And there, I'll leave it for now as a little introduction to Ash and her life in the desert.
So we met Ash, and she's one of the many memorable female characters in your books, which also include Ellie from The Silence, and Angela from the Relics series, and Rose from The Hunt. They're all complex characters of agency. You've also written female characters for a number of high-profile IPs, including Lenore Brock in, did I pronounce it correctly? Lenore.
Yeah.
Lenore Brock in Into the Void, which is part of the Star Wars universe, and Liz Sherman from the Hellboy universe. So what or who are your inspirations for the female characters in your books?
I think probably, my mum was a very, strong-minded woman and very forthright and massive influence on my love of reading and my love of writing, actually. I often say I'm a writer probably because of my mum, because she got me into reading at a very young age and introduced me to, I was reading kids' books when I was pre-teen, 8, 9, 10. I was reading Willard Price and Hardy Boys books. And then I guess I was 11, maybe not even 11. My mum gave me The Rats by James Herbert to read, which isn't a kid's book by any sort of stretch of the imagination. But she, in doing that, she gave me a real love of reading and a desire to write, which I did through my teens. So I guess inspiration for characters like that, probably subconsciously, my mum and certainly my grandmother, who was also a very sort of prominent figure in my youth, my memory still. But also, I mean, I think from when I started writing in, with a view to getting published in my early 20s, there was never any, I don't remember any decision of mine to start writing strong female characters as such. It just felt natural that half of my characters and a lot of my lead characters were going to be female. But in sort of storytelling wise and fiction wise, and it probably sounds glib because I'm sure you've had this answer from other writers, but Ripley from Aliens is my favorite film of all time. And I think at the time when Alien came out, certainly Alien was late 70s, Aliens was mid 80s. That was at the time when you could either watch a slasher film where traditionally the main characters are teenagers that boys, male and female, who have sex and then get killed, or you watch Alien where the hero, much to your surprise at the time, probably isn't Dallas, it's Ripley, and in Aliens she absolutely became the most powerful central character, and I think that being one of my favorite films of all time probably leads through a lot into my writing, I think.
All right. So yeah, I was going to refer to Ripley as well in my next question. So this is a nice sort of tie-in. So as it seems that horror as a genre in both modern and folk storytelling has traditionally not been kind to female figures and characters. So women are portrayed as everything from murderers, such as Lizzie Borden and Dracula's handmaidens, to victims. Well, countless horror movies can attest to that, as you described just now. But Allie, Angela, and Rose, however, follow what this is a tie into what you were mentioning just now. They follow the mode of Ellen Ripley. They are proactive and tough-minded when dealing with the horrors that they encounter. So what are some of the methods that you have used to subvert female stereotypes and tropes in horror when creating and writing your female characters?
I think just trying to treat them as three-dimensional characters. So Ali, for instance, from The Silence. I mean, Ali's probably a good case to talk about. Because she's really based on my daughter. When I wrote The Silence, it's a family in peril novel, which is pretty much most of what I write since I became a father 24 years ago has been family in peril, because that's what scares me, and it's what drives my writing, I think. So Ali was based on my daughter, who, and I think without it being her really in the book, she inspired a lot of Ali's strengths and weaknesses. And I think the important thing is that try and treat all your characters, male, female, as real characters, three-dimensional characters who have strengths, weaknesses, faults, and aspects of their character to admire. So it never, I think, like I said just now, it never struck me. It was never a conscious decision of mine to think, right, now this next novel has got to have a strong female character in it. Every novel I've written has got female characters and male characters. And I think this might be a fault of mine from a young age when I started writing, but it never troubled me trying to write female characters. I know some writers, some male writers, it might, but it's never. And this might show in my early writing. I don't know. Maybe I don't write them very well. I don't know. I don't think I've had much bad feedback, but it never struck me as something different, if you know what I mean. It's just I'm writing about real life, so in real my experience of real life is being surrounded by strong women as well as women as well as men. Like my mum, like I said, probably one of my big inspirations.
Yeah, and the interesting thing when we're talking about Ripley is Ripley was originally written as a man.
Yeah, yeah.
And James Cameron just said when I think when Sigourney Weaver came in and blew them away during auditions, they just switched over to Sigourney Weaver, and no one could tell the difference, really.
Yeah, yeah. And I think, like I said,
it was written so well. It didn't matter if Ripley was male or female.
Yeah, and I think probably, I mean, when Alien came out, 76, I was 7, so I didn't see it when it first came out. But I imagine it was, especially around that time, it was probably a surprise that the Victor, the hero in the film, was a female as opposed to Dallas or. I mean, Dallas was obviously set up to be the hero of that film, and then he was taken out. So, yeah, that's really interesting. But then I think as a character, she absolutely bloomed in Aliens and brought so much to that role. I believe she was Oscar nominated, which is fairly unheard of for an action horror sci-fi movie. But it is my favorite film of all time, and I don't think it would be if it weren't for Sigourney Weaver and her portrayal. And the wonderful thing about it is she's not just absolute kick-ass in that film. She's also utterly vulnerable. And I think that and such a great performance. The writing of the character was great, but Sigourney Weaver really brought that sort of reality to the role. She's a real three-dimensional character.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense, doesn't it? I mean, if we see a character, in the position of Ripley trying to deal with this horrific, bunch of aliens that are out to eat you, and you don't show any fear, you don't show any vulnerability. It's not going to be very believable.
No, right, and especially in the extended version of Aliens, where you understand her drive to save Newt because her daughter is dead. So Ripley's daughter grew up and died while she was in hypersleep. So and a lot of that doesn't really come through in the theatrical release. I don't think it gives her character a whole new aspect when you realize why she's doing what she's doing. I think.
Yeah. Well, do you find it easier to subvert or avoid female stereotypes through writing your own characters versus writing stories set in established IPs like Star Wars, or are there different challenges for each situation?
I don't think I view it as a different challenge, but the Star Wars Lenore Brock is an interesting character for me because so first of all, Lenore is an anagram of Eleanor, who's my daughter. Just shows you how my family, inspire me as I'm writing. But Lenore Brock, when I wrote that novel, it was so it's called Into the Void. That was the first novel in the Star Wars timeline. So it was 25,000 years before New Hope. So for me as a writer, that was great because I didn't have to read all the Star Wars novels that came before because mine was the first. But I also I ended up it was set in a comic universe called Into the Void. So I had some stuff to refer to. I had the star system, Titan star system, where the Jedi began. But I proposed a few story ideas to my editor, and every time they said, "Oh, you can't do that because we might need that planet in the future to blow up or something." So I came up with the whole novel is my own. There's only a few characters in that novel that intrude from the comics, as it were. And my main character, I just thought it's going to be a cool, kick-ass character, and it's going to be a woman. And I can't actually remember the thought process of going through that, but I found after writing it and people started reading it, I was getting mail saying, "You've written a really strong female character in a Star Wars novel. We haven't seen it before." And I don't know if that's true or not, but when the audio book was being produced, the the audio company or I think the person reading it got in touch with me and saying, I just love this character. And what I liked about her was that she, I did have some negative feedback on that character because she swore. You know, it was like she used cuss words. They were not like bad cuss words, but in a Star Wars novel, it was like, oh, you can't have a woman swearing in a Star Wars novel. So why? Because she's, you know, it's.
So is this feedback from the readers or feedback from the editor?
A little back. Well, a little from the readers after the book came out, but when the book was being edited, I think there were a couple of comments. It wasn't really flack. It was just a couple of comments saying, this character is using swear words, and generally in Star Wars novels, I mean, they were pretty mid-level swear words. It wasn't anything that you don't hear kids saying nowadays, you know. But my editor was great about it, and she said, no, it's in character. And I really loved that because, you know, she supported. It's only a couple of, you know.
Yeah, it's interesting because, you know, when you say as some readers, you got some of this feedback from readers, and we've noticed an interesting sort of split in gender of, you know, the experience of male Read for Pixels authors versus female Read for Pixels authors, where, you know, female authors, many of them say that they've got a lot of pushback. They've been getting they get a lot of flack if their characters are unlikable. And, you know,
right.
Even just one swear word could sort of tip the female character into being unlikable, quote unquote.
Right. Yeah.
And you don't see this for male characters. No one says anything if it's a male character swearing like a sailor.
No, that's strange, isn't it? It is strange. I think I don't know if it's unconscious bias that they think because I've introduced the female character who's the lead and who is quite. I mean, she's. I think the most important thing is to make a character relatable rather than likable. I hope people like her as a character, but she does some pretty heinous things in the book as well. You know, she's violent and she's unrelenting in her drive, and she swears a bit. But it's a lot of if I remember the couple of instances she does swear, it's like it's a self-preservation thing. It's when she's faced with dangers. Yeah, it's strange that such flack comes. You know, it's like I said before. You're trying to write a three-dimensional character. Any three-dimensional character is going to have faults and perceived faults, whether they're real or not. The whole swearing thing just blew my mind. It was just, I suppose, in my head, I was writing a Tim Lebbon Star Wars novel, which was a bit more violent than some maybe. But then my editor had said to me, "We've come to you because we want a sword and sorcery novel in space," because this was pre lightsabers. They were called Force swords, so they were literal swords. So I just thought, I'm going to write my own Star Wars novel. It was a strange thing. I don't think I felt much kickback because of the character. I felt a little bit of kickback because I had the character acting unlikably in a couple of instances, you know, not just being there to be a paradigm of virtue, you know. I think that's what it was.
The interesting thing is what we've observed over the years is that readers seem to apply the same double standards to characters, the same sexist double standards that they don't really think about as part of their social conditioning. It applies to the way they perceive male characters versus female characters. The same way that, you know, men and women, you know, men can do certain things that if women do, we're deemed unlikable, too aggressive, you know, not relatable at all. So that's something that we've noticed over the years as we do Read for Pixels.
Right.
So speaking of, you know, going back to what you said about, you know, you never had any issues writing female characters, but, you know, as we can see from the hashtag men writing women, many male authors can't seem to portray female characters well. Even best-selling male authors like Brandon Sanderson have talked about how they initially found it difficult to write women well. And Brandon has said that it had taken a lot of work to finally write compelling and complex female characters. Now, Brandon writes fantasy, but we've noticed in horror as well that quite a few male authors have trouble writing, not having their female characters get fridged
Mm,
or your walking, talking stereotype.
mm.
Why do you think they have trouble writing stories that pass the Bechdel test? So two women talking to each other about something other than a man, despite the fact that there are many more things that women talk about other than men.
Of course. But I should qualify what I said about I have always written female characters and I've never sat back and thought I'm not doing this right. That's not to say that I have done it right. I can't remember much feedback saying to me your female characters are terrible. I'm not claiming they're great. I just want to write stories set in a recognizable world, and a lot of the time it makes sense that, like in The Silence, for instance, with Ali as the daughter, it made sense to have her as the lead character. I think why people have trouble, I don't know. Like I said, I'm surrounded by, heavily influenced by my mum and my grandmother, my daughter as well, my wife. So I just find it natural to include as many female characters in my books as male characters. And the fact that it doesn't trouble me isn't necessarily a stamp of authenticity. The fact that I always write female characters, or a lot of the time, doesn't prove that I'm doing it right. I think my characters are okay. I think Lenore Brock, and I wrote that book. I wrote Star Wars 10 or 12 years ago. I have had a lot of good feedback and some, a bit of negative feedback, but mostly good feedback about that character. So I think I got that one right, but it's a space fantasy novel, so who knows if I got it right. I think you just listen to women as much as you do men. As a male writer, I listen to, you're always working as a writer, and without having without making notes when you're sitting in a coffee shop about people's conversations and stuff, you listen and understand how people talk, and the fact that they do often talk about subjects other than men.
Well, we are women. We have a lot to do. Most of us have lots on our plate to get done. So yeah. So let's talk about the male characters in your books. So they range from Jack from the Toxic City series, who treats his fellow survivor Lucy Ann as his equal, to Jesse in The Last Storm, who tries very hard as a dad and also tries hard to do no harm with his abilities. So do you think that reframing how stories describe men away from hostile and toxic stereotypes and towards complexity and even vulnerability can be one of the ways that horror writers can break away from toxic tropes that promote toxic masculinity and the dehumanization of women?
Yeah, I think so. And again, I think it's just trying to write realistic characters. Like Jesse in The Last Storm, for instance, is probably out of Jesse, his wife Karina, and their daughter Ash, who are all estranged in the beginning of the book. The book essentially is about family coming together again to solve the horrendous curse that they carry. Jesse's probably the most damaged character, actually, because he starts the book in the mistaken belief that he's caused his daughter's death, and he's retreated from that, as opposed to he sort of cut himself off from reality in a way in the beginning of the book. And it's Karina, his wife, who is also horribly damaged by what the family's been through, but she's the one who's sort of retained a bit of sort of perception of reality and a bit of strength about trying to pull them back together again. men are horribly vulnerable a lot of the time, and I, they suffer from anxieties and things, and I think I probably put more of myself than is comfortable in a lot of my male characters, without thinking about it. I think it's an unconscious fact and unconscious reality that most writers put a lot of themselves in their characters, and I certainly do in my male characters. I've written books before, and my wife's read it or a friend's read it and said, "Oh wow, that's you, isn't it?" And I'm, "Well, I don't know." And then I think about it. Oh yeah, I suppose that is the way I act sometimes. Yeah, I think the way to write real characters and believable characters is to be as real and believable as you can, and write three-dimensional characters. So that you're going to get, some of my characters are horribly toxic, when some of my male characters are pretty horrific because they exist in the world, and I know people who act like that, who do almost grab hold of their toxic masculinity and parade it. And to write about them is one of the best ways of exposing them, I guess, and tearing them down, I guess.
Yeah. So we have a question from the audience.
Mm-hmm.
So Happy Goat Horror says, "Hi Tim, love the book." I think they're talking about The Last Storm.
Yeah.
You come up with the premise first and then fill in character plots, or did you get the characters first, then form the premise around them?
This is an interesting one with The Last Storm, because it's actually, I wrote a story about 15 or 18 years ago called Hell Came Down, which was very much using the same sort of premise about rainmakers bringing down rain and other things, creatures, and even in that book, it was a father pursuing his daughter. So I think in this case, it was probably the premise first. I wanted to write another climate change thriller, and it seemed to be the one that was calling to me at the time. But the characters for me in this book are really, really, I mean, characters are always more important than anything in a novel. But in this one, it was the idea that the family starts estranged, made the characters, all three main characters, really feel really strong and three-dimensional to me. And it gave them a real, they've got a solid history. From page one, I know who the characters are, and hopefully the reader gets that sort of feel really early on in the book. Sometimes you'll start a book and a character pops up and you don't know anything about them, and it's as if their story starts on page one. No character's story starts on page one. There's a whole background to them that you need to dip into and explore in the story. And I felt I knew these characters as soon as I started writing the book. So that was a really bad answer, because I don't think it answered the question. But I think for different books, different stories, it works differently. Sometimes, more often than not, it's general story idea, general concepts, and then characters build around that. But in this one, I sort of felt the characters were dancing around in my head, ready to have their stories told, to be honest.
All right. So that takes us, that sort of smoothly segues us to the next lot of discussion questions that we have. So stories are one of the most powerful ways of bringing about social change. So let's talk about writing and genre, particularly since horror stories all feature some sort of violence, and more often than not, violence against women. Now, horror can be seen as a genre that addresses the deepest fears of culture and society. For example, much has been made of how zombie movies are social commentary on everything from consumerism to politics. So in your opinion, can horror stories successfully be used to address the issue of misogyny and violence against women?
Yeah, absolutely. Because so a horror story is essentially, could be any genre. There's that really famous Doug Winter quote: "Horror is it's not a genre, it's an emotion." So you can tell horror stories in any realm of fiction that you want to. There's historical horror stories, there's adventure horror stories, there's sci-fi horror stories. But you can, obviously you can, like you say, literature is one of the most powerful mediums through which to express ideas. It's what it's there for. But I also don't think I think you challenge toxic masculinity and stuff like that by confronting it and not ignoring it. So sometimes, uncomfortably though it is, you do have to write about women being subject to such abuse as that. And it's really, I find it, there's an instance in The Last Storm where Ash is attacked, and it's a really difficult scene to write. The guy doesn't end up in a good state afterwards, but yeah, I think any writer has a real responsibility to confront social issues if they're choosing to tell stories in that realm. And obviously, as horror writers, we're as responsible as any to, because we're writing about horror from choice and from page one. So, in confronting stuff that frightens you, like I say, family in peril is always my biggest fear, and part of that is, my wife and daughter. I remember when the Me Too movement started, and I started talking to my daughter a lot more about stuff like that. And I remember being pretty upset and shocked about a couple of the things she told me about that she'd experienced that she hadn't mentioned to me, and I don't think she mentioned them to my wife. And it was almost as if she was. It was almost as if it was normal behavior, what she'd experienced, and it was nothing too damaging, as it were, but it did upset me, and and since then it's made me more aware of instances like that in my own writing and how I have to treat them, but also how it's very important to use your fiction to confront stuff like that and not ignore it. I think it's too easy to steer away from uncomfortable writing. You just have to treat it as well as you can and be as honest and as as open as you can about it, I think.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about horror now, but the one author that I always think of when thinking about, someone who can effectively confront social issues like this is Sir Terry Pratchett. But he used humor, and he used it to great effect. So I'm thinking that horror authors have a slightly different toolkit or toolbox of tropes and stereotypes and whatnot that they can press into service for this sort of writing.
Yeah, and sort of destroying tropes is a great way of getting the message across, because stuff like that stands out. The old trope I mentioned earlier of, my teen years were in the 80s when I'd watch loads of slasher flicks, and like you said, often the trope, the female trope in there is a woman that gets horribly murdered, and it's just, at the time I was watching it and thinking, yeah, this is a horror film. But then you confront those tropes in your fiction now, and it really brings it home to people, I think. That's why confronting stuff like that, like I said, in your fiction is more important than avoiding it. And that comes with its own potential problems and uncomfortable feedback sometimes, but I think it's important to do it, really, stand your ground.
Yeah, and our very first Read for Pixels author is actually a horror author. It was Joe Hill.
Oh, Joe, yeah.
Yeah, and Joe's answer to a variation of this question is, he said, just stop and think, are we telling the right stories? Is this the sort of story you want to tell? Is this a story worth telling? And why are we ignoring anything that we ignore and not stick in our stories? And that was what he asked the audience, actually. He asked them back, think about why you're telling the story, how you're telling the story. And, and that was what got us thinking about all of this. Oh, and also the line, between consent and coercion isn't always very clear in horror. And many subgenres of horror include graphic scenes of rape and sexual assault of women and girls as a staple shorthand for creating a violent and very scary storyboard. Do you think this is an issue that horror stories have started tackling successfully in recent years?
I think so. It's a difficult question to answer. Yes, I think the answer is yes, but there's still a long way to go. So I think, like I've said before, you have to not steer away from talking about stuff like this, but it also has to be central to the story, not incidental, first of all, and also treated well, whether that means events like that happening off screen, as it were. But I think Joe's quote was really good. Are you telling the right story? And you need to tell this in that story. But yeah, I think certainly the last 3, 4, 5 years, horror writers in general, are much more aware of what they're writing about and how, and often how important it is and how influential some of what you write about can be. I'm not saying I'm an influential writer by any means, but it's very important to do your best to get stuff right, and to not. I don't consider myself a shock horror writer, as it were. There are writers who set out to shock in their fiction, and that's fine. But they also carry almost a greater responsibility to be treating their subjects in the right way, I think.
Yeah, it's sort of like shocking, the shock and awe method. It sort of gets me thinking about jump scares in horror movies.
Right.
So you think of the horror movies that use jump scares most effectively, like off the top of my head, I can think of The Conjuring and The Conjuring 2. And they use jump scares really effectively. And the interesting thing is, well, the women and girls in the movie, in both movies, they were the ones targeted by the ghosts and demons. But we don't see any sexual violence at all. We just see someone being targeted because they were in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So effectiveness, I think, probably, which sort of leads me to the other question I had. So as a horror author, and some horror authors use a lot more violence than others. How do you find the balance between showing violence as an integral part of the story and not showing violence gratuitously? Is there a way for authors, especially horror authors who are just finding their feet, to figure out where the line is drawn in the sand for that?
Yeah, so I do include violence in my books, sometimes quite nasty violence, but I'm always, and certainly the older I get and the more I write, I think much more aware of whether I need to describe it gratuitously. And often it's more effective if you don't. And I think, it's important to know where and when to use it and whether it's gratuitous or not. Like I just said, some horror writers. I was on a panel in a convention a long time ago in America, and one of the writers was saying, "Oh, I love writing about taboo subjects. It really shocks people, and I really want to shock people with my writing and disgust them." And I sort of said, "Well, why do you want to disgust people with your writing?" And it made me realize every writer's got a different aim in what they do. I'm a horror writer, but I don't set out to disgust anyone or even scare people, because it's actually quite difficult to scare somebody with a horror book, with a horror novel. You can unsettle them and make them think. And the most important part of that is making them think. I'd rather people finish one of my books and sit back and have a good think about it than read something and think, "Oh, that's disgusting and grim." you know, so so using violence is really important if it's part of the story, such as I wrote a novel called The Hunt which was one of the few non-supernatural books I've ever written. In fact, there's two novels. Family Man is the sort of a sequel. And one of the main characters in The Hunt is called Rose, who became a main character accidentally. Actually, my main character in that book was Chris, which really is a sort of a autobiographical, because he's I'm into endurance sport like marathons and Ironmans and stuff like that, and so is Chris, and his family get kidnapped. And he's the subject of a human hunt. And he's told, if you're caught and killed, your family go free. If you escape, your family die. So he's got this terrible dilemma. And then this incidental character popped up called Rose, who then, as I was writing the novel, just became she's the main character of the novel, really. She commits some pretty horrendous acts of violence in the book, because she is a previous victim of this organization that sets up human hunts, and her family was killed by them because she escaped. So she's out for revenge. So in that instance, I love Rose as a character. She scares me because she's unrelenting and focused all the way through the book. She changes towards the end in a really good way, I think. But she, in that instance, I found it necessary to talk about the violence. Got to fly. Talk about the violence she was perpetrating, because it was because of all the horrificness she'd been put through. So you have to pick and choose, and as usual with any writing, you won't please everyone, and some people will take issue with what you do. But violence isn't essential to a horror story, but sometimes it can form part of it. I think that's probably
I mean, some of the best horror stories that I've read or watched don't have any blood spilled, but they are supremely creepy, and they stay with you for ages afterwards and make you think about, look over your shoulder and hide under the blanket. But after a while, you start thinking about, the central themes that come up in the story. So you're not disgusted. You're not grossed out. So because you're not grossed out, you can start sort of, once you get past the creepiness, you can start thinking about, wait a minute, that was about that. So
yeah. But the opposite sometimes. Like last night, I watched The Thing again for probably the 50th time. It's one of my favorite horror films. Gross as hell. I mean, the special effects are disgusting, and it's and still unbeaten nowadays, 40 years later. But it's also a film that really gets in your head, and so I think watching The Thing, for instance, without any of the body horror would have taken away a lot of the effect of it.
Okay, so let's sort of pivot to sort of a wider topic. Geek culture in general, including speculative genres such as horror, fantasy, and science fiction, has had its share of critics saying that it's still too male-dominated, despite a rising number of prominent, well-respected, and well-known female authors and creators. Plus, there is still plenty of hostile, misogynistic, and sexist behavior by male geeks towards female geeks. What do you think needs to be done to make geek culture as a whole, whether it's comics or gaming or books or cons, more welcoming for women and girls?
Wow. I think it's improved a huge amount in the last few years. There's a lot more female writers. I think there's always been a lot of female writers around. There's a lot more female writers getting published quite prominently now, which is really good. I think so. I got a friend who's a female horror writer, and she actually said to me recently, "I'm getting really peed off with being called a female horror writer. I'm just a horror writer." And I sort of understood that, but I also said to her, "You're sort of, you're quite prominent, and you're sort of in the vanguard of the push for more female writers being published." So I think, I don't know, is it right or wrong of me to say? I don't know, but I think it's important for her to be known as a talented female horror writer. And hopefully soon it'll change. Hopefully soon she'll just be known as a horror writer. But we are still in a time of change, I think. generally for the good. You know, people are reading a lot more female horror writers, and as for conventions and things, conventions have become really good over the last few years at making sure behavior is noticed, making sure everyone, male or female or, you know, gender fluid, making sure everyone has a safe space at a convention, and that their safety is paramount. You know, I've not sort of witnessed any sort of troubling behavior at conventions, but then I'm also aware that it has gone on, and some people have been troubled. But I think I think the inclusivity thing is expanding and getting as much attention as it's needed for years. You know, it's getting the attention it's needed for years. So I think we're going the right way slowly, and it's not happening. It's not happening as fast as it should. But then also forcing change, I think, is actually important by having like balanced content list in anthologies, for instance. I think it's important to do that because if you don't force change and wait for it to happen at its own pace, there's always reasons why it doesn't happen as quickly, whether they be you know, unconscious bias or latent bias. You know, these things can be slowed down if you don't keep your foot on the gas, as it were. I don't know if that all made sense, but I think we're going the right way. I think that's what it boils down to.
Yeah, it does take a conscious effort, and you know, we've heard from so many women writers that, you know, even in conventions, even the decision of the organizers to make sure that panels are balanced, that are not male dominated, that makes a huge difference in you know how it all goes on during the event.
Yeah, it makes a difference to the attendees who want to be on panels and want to be you know, sharing their expertise, but I think it also makes just as important a difference perception-wise of me in the people attending these conventions get to see a more balanced view and a more balanced membership, which is really important.
Mm-hmm. Oh, we have a comment from the audience. So Happy Goat Horror says, not a question, but just want to say thank you for simply representing women as regular human beings. It's refreshing to read horror novels where gender doesn't even occur to me.
That's nice. That's good. Yeah, it's pretty much what I said. It's just, you know, if you're writing a novel, all you know, all horror novels the characters are based on real life. You know, you want your characters to be three-dimensional, and there's no way they're going to be three-dimensional if you just people your books full of strong bronzed guys and you know, princesses in distress, as it were. Even, you know, I was thinking about when you mentioned Lenore Brock, my Star Wars character, and about how, you know, Leia, even in the first film, she started as a princess who needed rescuing, but she quickly turned into someone who could handle herself and handle a blaster. But you know, even at the start, I know it was 77, but it was like, oh, let's rescue the princess. Fairy tale in space. But maybe Leia was ahead of her time, because she turned from a princess in distress to a general and a really powerful character, really strong character.
Yeah. So we do have a question about parenting, since you mentioned your daughter is one of your main inspirations. So parents are usually the most influential role models in a person's life. For most people, they are the earliest role models. So as a father yourself, what do you think parents can do to help prevent violence against women and girls in future generations, and also get boys involved in helping to do so?
Well, I think if you're a decent person, you try and pass, with, you know, decent views, you pass that down to your kids, and it's a natural thing. I think, you know, my kids are great. I think they're two of the best people I know, and I try and pass down the things that I believe are right, but also really importantly, give them space to explore their own views and realize what they think's right. And I honestly think if you put your kids in a room on their own with no influences from a young age till they were teens, they emerge with no kid's going to emerge with a toxic masculinity view, because that's imbued on them by society and culture, I think, a lot of the time. So I think you just tell your kids to be careful what they take from culture and literature and stuff like that, and to make sure, just be kind. Being kind to people is the best advice you can give to your children, because it covers all eventualities, I think. Treat people like you want to be treated as well.
Yeah. So we have one final question. You have been so incredibly supportive of our Read for Pixels campaign and our anti-violence against women work as a whole. So why do you support the cause to end violence against women? And what do you think authors can do to help with the cultural change needed to eradicate this violence?
Well, the first part of the question, how would you not support it? How would you not support a campaign stopping violence against women? Why would you not? And how do authors support it? Well, like we talked about, for the last hour, deal with it in your fiction, but in a way that's sensible and sensitive, not gratuitous. And I think it's really important. Authors have I write for myself, and I think most writers do, but they also, if you're a published writer like me and a lot of the other guests you've had, you do also have a responsibility to make sure what you're putting out there is sensitive and responsible. You need to be making sure you're not sending wrong messages to readers who could be influenced by what they read in your books. So I think every writer has a responsibility to their readership, whether they write ostensibly for themselves or not. I do write for myself, but then I also write on the end. I've been earning a living writing for 16, 17 years, so I'm also always aware that I'm writing stuff that people are going to be reading, other people are going to be reading. So, and that's quite important that you keep that in mind as well.
So I'm going to put myself back on screen. Hello, everyone. If you've joined us late, I'm was the disembodied voice off screen having this chat with Tim. So very quickly, we're going to do a bit of wrap up. Thank you for joining us here today, Tim.
It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, and let's talk about your goodies. So you donated 2 goodies to our fundraiser that's up on Rally Up. And the first one, the Big Scares book bundle, has been snapped up. That's gone by Dana Cameron in the US. Thank you again, Dana. But we do still have one more goodie left, which is Tim's Death by Fungi minor character treat. This is a very unique Tuckerization treat because and it's available to any donor anywhere in the world. There's only one of this. So if you are interested in it, you need to quickly go to our fundraising page and just snap it up. So it's basically an opportunity to name a minor character in Tim's next book. And this character is going to experience, being killed by mushrooms, basically.
Basically, yeah. So, you can name a character, or I'll use your name. If Dana wants to stump up for this one as well, then I'll kill Dana Cameron by fungi in my new novel. So yeah, you can either. I think most people quite like the idea of them being named in a book. I've done it a couple of times. I wrote a trilogy of Alien and Predator novels, which was really big scale with loads of characters. So I had to think up loads of names. So I asked my Facebook followers. So I've killed lots of Facebook followers. Having their faces bitten off by predators and aliens. So, but this one's unique. This one is only going to be, this one person or character, and you will be killed by fungi in a most horrible way, probably.
Yeah, I think I mean, my imagination's sort of running riot right now. I mean, how bad can it be? Yes, pretty bad.
It could be pretty bad, yeah. I'll make it as bad as the person wants, you know. But the good thing about this is, if someone buys this, you can give me their email, and they and I can chat and just talk about what it's going to be and how extreme they want it to be, maybe, or whatever. So, I'll while I'm not going to steer the plot of the novel around this, they'll be quite involved in the novel and the fungal disaster.
Yeah. And if you're in the US and you donate to get this treat, I think part of it is going to be tax deductible, but you'll have to check with your tax expert. And best of all, Tim is also going to send you one signed and personalized first edition copy of the book, hot off the presses, once it's released, to keep as your memento, so you can take the book around with you and show everyone, yeah, this is where I get killed by mushrooms.
Well, it's probably so the book I'm working on it now. It's going to be released January 24, which is a bit of a wait. But before then, there'll be advanced review copies with your name and fungal death in it. So I'll make sure the publisher sends you an advanced review copy as well.
So see, you get 2 copies. So advanced review copy, so you can see how you die firsthand, and then you get the first edition signed and personalized by Tim, so you can sort of put it in your collection and it'll look really nice up there in your bookshelf. So there's only one of this, so please donate generously. It's going to take a pretty generous donation because this doesn't come along every day. Tim doesn't offer this to every a lot of the time. So but if you would like something else, something smaller, there are also plenty more author goodies available for authors such as Carol Goodman, Namina Forna, Rin Chuperko, Daniel H. Wilson, Kwame Mbalia, Sue Ann Jafarian, Sujata Massey, Eugene Bacon, Charlie N. Holmberg, Tor Books UK, Random House Children's Books, and more. And so we chatted a little bit about this at the beginning. We've only raised $2,030 so far, which is 40% of the way to our $5,000 goal. And this is quite possibly, no, it's not quite possibly, it's definitely the slowest ever Read for Pixels fundraiser. So please, everyone, please give generously so that we can keep the lights on, we can keep all our programs running, including daily helpline sessions. Donate what you can. There are treats of all sizes. Even if you donate $10, you get a treat. If you donate $25, one of the authors is going to send you, a book that's signed and personalized just for you. So make your donation, big or small, all are welcome. And also, I'll put this on screen so you can see where to go to get your goodies. So let's do this first. So you can donate to get the goodies via Rally Up. You go to https://tinyurl.com/R4P Rally Up 2022. Please make sure that you type this out exactly, and because it's case sensitive, and Xiaoqin has actually also included the link in the YouTube chat box. And you can find out more about Read for Pixels at bit.ly/readforpixels. Again, this is case sensitive. And also, we do have a charity anthology that's out. It's the classic edition of our first charity anthology, Giving the Devil His Due, where The Twilight Zone Meets Promising Young Woman is now available in both paperback and ebook edition. And the audiobook edition is set to be released in October 2022. So they'll be coming out all over the world, starting from October 1st, depending on your bookseller. The dates will differ. So additionally, we've teamed up with 12 of the 16 authors to offer an exclusive limited edition anthology book plate for buyers. Each author only has 16 signed book plates, and it'll be on the first come, first served basis. Each book plate includes a resource for domestic violence and sexual assault victims and survivors in 205 countries. And you can get more information about the anthology and find out how to score a book plate by visiting bit.ly/giving the devil his due. Again, this is case sensitive, and Xiaoqin has put it in the YouTube chat box as well, so you can click on it to go from there. And for those of you who are interested in getting your very own copy of the anthology, you can order it from any major bookseller, including Amazon Kobo, Google Play, Book Depository, and more. And 100% of the net proceeds go towards keeping our campaigns, programs, and initiatives such as this one alive and kicking. And I'm going to take this off screen.
It's a great lineup of writers as well, I just want to say.
Oh, yeah, it's got Stephen Graham Jones.
Yeah.
You've got plenty of really good horror authors on it. It's Lee Murray, Karen Warren. Yeah. Karen Warren's original story, The Steering Wheel Club, for the anthology, it's actually been nominated twice for different awards.
Fantastic.
Yeah, she wrote that for us. And Ellen Datlow actually included it in her best of.
Oh, brilliant.
2021 horror stories.
Right.
So if anyone's curious about that story, and it really is a really creepy story, actually, it makes a good point about domestic violence. Really good point. You get it. Today's actually the last day for anyone who wants to get the ebook to get it for $1.99. So it's on a BookBub deal, and today's the last day to get it. So it's the 25th of September today, 2022. So if you haven't got a copy, and you've got if you're on Kobo, Google Play, Apple Books, or Amazon, you can just go download it for $1.99. $1.99 to read that absolutely chilling story. And by the way, the back of the book has 2 pages worth of resources for survivors and victims of violence against women. So you have that too. Now, before we go off, Tim actually has an announcement himself that he wants to share with everyone.
Yeah, so it's been quite a big year for a book. I've had 3 books released this year, and there's one other coming out next month. So it's a book from Dark Horse Publishers. It's called Festival. It's co-written with my friend Christopher Golden and heavily illustrated by Peter Bergting, who is just one of the best comic illustrators there is. It is a beautiful volume. It's spooky and horrific and fun. Lots of Viking horror in the book. It's modern day, but it's about Vikings returning to wreak vengeance on a certain group of people. So it's called Festival. It's out next month from Dark Horse. I believe you can get it on all the usual places or direct from Dark Horse themselves.
So is it like Stardust by Neil Gaiman, where there's prose and illustrations go with it?
Yeah, so it's not a comic book, but it's got, I don't know how many internal illustrations, probably 30 or 40. So it's so Peter's illustrated quite a bit of the book internally, and it just looks. I think Dark Horse are doing it in a slightly oversized edition hardback, and it's going to look beautiful. Can't wait to see it. In fact, I think Chris posted that he got a copy of his, so mine is long overdue. If Dark Horse is listening, where's my copy? So yeah, I'll try and track that down soon. But it'll be all over my socials, and I'll post in my newsletter about it as well.
All right, and you know what? It might even be on the way to you. And our experience in the last 3 years is it takes ages for anything to go in and out of the US, really.
Yeah, it has for a while, actually. It probably is on the way. They probably mailed it to me the same time they mailed it to Chris, and it's stuck mid-Atlantic somewhere, or it's stuck in a customs house somewhere, almost undoubtedly. But yeah, can't wait to see it.
So we've come to the end of this session, and if anyone wants to find out about violence against women and what you can do about it, do visit us at www.thepixelproject.net. We have lots of resources ranging from beginners primer pages for beginners who want to learn more about different types of violence against women, all the way to lists of helplines and resources. It's all there in one website under us. So we've come to the end of the session. So goodbye, good night, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world.
And thanks for coming. Thanks, Regina.